All right, I'm going to get us kicked off so that we honor
All
our
right,
time together.
cool.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. Welcome to our Amazon Games continued celebration of Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, APAM, for those with in the know around our acronyms, of course. We're excited to see everybody today for our final event of the month. And our guest today is Annalyn Cruz, who's going to help us heal our inner critic and connect us to the most confident and best versions of ourselves, regardless of where or how we grew up. So, a little bit about Annalyn. She's the CEO and founder of Grounded in Wisdom and has over 20 years experience where she's focused on leadership development, diversity and inclusion, a lot around employee experience and manager development as well. Her bigger why, when I say why, always led her to ensure that those she served felt a sense of belonging, felt seen and heard, and guided those to find their own powerful voice and agency in a world that often tells them otherwise. So Annalyn felt especially pulled towards serving those within underrepresented communities and identities. As a Filipina Asian American and first generation woman of color with immigrant parents, Annalyn knows the challenges of navigating between multiple identities and worlds. She's passionate about the intersections of cultural upbringing, gender, and other identities that play into one's career and life journey. So, full disclosure, Annalyn and I are good friends. We have worked together, we have traveled together, we have stressed out together, we have prevailed together. She is one of my favorite people in the world, and I'm honored to call her a good friend. And a fun fact, we also share a birthday. Um, Before I give it over to AC, a little reminder, little housekeeping. The captions are on if you need them. We are recording this so that we can share it with those who are unable to join us live. And we have a little giveaway. So if you have questions that you want to ask, throw them in the chat throughout. And anybody who asks a question is going to get one of our amazingly fabulous pieces of game swag that Hillary has a whole bunch of, and it's a games bag. So we want to share the swag with everybody. So if you've got a burning question or just a question you want to ask Annalyn in general about her talk or what she does, please put it in the chat and we will get to them throughout the talk today. So please help me welcome Annalyn to Amazon Games today. Annalyn, we're so thrilled to have you. Over to
Thank
you.
you, Rach. Thank you so much. And thanks for the beautiful intro. And you all have to know that Rachel is one of my favorite people, one of the most amazing colleagues that I've ever worked with in my entire career. And I'm so happy that our paths continue to intersect. And I know it's going to go beyond this talk. And so I just want to thank you, Rachel, for bringing me here and the rest of the Amazon Games team and Amazon Entertainment. So I feel really humbled and I feel really privileged to share this space with all of you. So before I kick off, I would love two things. One, right now I see your beautiful names or your Zoom nickname on the screen. I'd love to see your face instead. So if you're comfortable, I would love it if you could turn your camera on because it makes me feel like we're all having this virtual fireside chat actually together. So if you are able to, please turn on your camera. And then I would love it if we could actually start off by grounding the space. So anytime I lead a workshop or even, when I'm meeting with one of my coaching clients, I like to just get into some breath work so that we're all present, we're all here. Okay, I lied. There's a third thing. If you have multiple tabs up, if you got your cell phone here and you're multitasking, I'm going to invite you to actually put all of that away or at least put it on snooze while we're here together. Because it's so rare when we get time to actually be completely present in this space with one another. Okay. So I would love it if we could do 3 mindful breaths together. So I invite you to put one hand on your heart, one hand on your low belly, and you can close your eyes if it feels comfortable and safe. And let's just go ahead and take 3 mindful breaths. So go ahead and take an inhale. You're going to feel your belly expand and rise. Hold it at the top and exhale. And since you're on mute, you could exhale audibly out loud. Okay. One more time. Let's go ahead and take that powerful inhale. And exhale. Final one. Inhale. I'm aware of my in-breath. And exhale. I'm aware of my out-breath. Awesome. You can open your eyes if you had them closed. And I always like doing some shoulder rolls back and forward and just little shoulder shimmying so that it signals to my body and mind that I'm here, I'm ready. We're all engaged, we're all present. So, and I also love the chat blowing up. So if there's any questions, to Rachel's point, you have any questions, any thoughts that come up as her and I have this conversation, it'd be great to hear what resonates with you all. All right, so let's kick it off. So I wanted to first start off with introducing myself. So thank you, Rach, for that beautiful bio. I wanted to go a little bit deeper and share with you some pictures of my family. So that's an old picture of me in the center, me graduating from college from the University of California in Santa Barbara. In the middle is my dear Aunt Lorna and my grandmother, who have since now passed away. But you'll see here, my mom, my dad, and my sister Elisa are still around, and I'm very grateful to have them be still here in my life. And that's my wonderful companion and my bestie Cab. So he is my dog that, for those of you who have pets or furry animals, you know that they are super special in our lives and teach us about all sorts of different life lessons. He teaches me how to be really present and to have fun and to remind myself of the joy in life. So I grew up in the Los Angeles area, in a small town called Bell, California. It's in Southeast LA. And my parents still live there. And what was interesting about growing up there was that I was one of the 3 Asian kids, Asian American kids in my school, in my elementary school. And it was predominantly a Mexican neighborhood, a Latino neighborhood, but predominantly Mexican. And growing up was really tough at times because I'm sure some of you can relate to this. There was some bullying that I had endured. There was some racism that I endured at a very young age. And I remember thinking to myself that I just don't want to be different. I just want to be like everybody else. Like everyone stop noticing what I look like and just see me as another kid in your class. And when I would talk to my parents about this, I remember having a conversation. I was probably around 7 or 8 years old. And I told my mom what was happening and that I was being made fun of. They would say that I was Chinese or Japanese, which I'm like, okay, I'm not. And why is that a bad thing, right? And my mom just responded, well, just tell them you're Filipino. They're not even right with what they're calling you. And I'm like, yes. And I'm being made fun of because I'm different, right? And I didn't completely understand how, looking and feeling different would impact later parts of my life. And I'm going to share a little bit more of that in just a bit. But it was always interesting and very challenging at times to live in these 2 worlds of being Filipino or being Asian Pacific Islander, and then being quote unquote American, right? I was born here, so I'm first generation Filipino. My parents immigrated to the United States in 1973. So it was always this battle of trying to figure out am I Filipino? Am I Asian? Am I American? Yet I don't speak Tagalog, the language that my parents and family grew up speaking. And yet I wasn't fully American. No one really saw me as that either. So having to work through and live through both of those worlds was very challenging at times. And I'm wondering, for those of you in the audience, how many of that resonates with you? And if it does, go ahead and hit like your favorite emoji or the heart, just so I know, where you're at and what your experience is. So if we can go to the next slide, Hillary. So when I grew up, I had many different messages that were sent to me. And these are some old pictures that I found recently that I took pictures with my cell phone on. So I was about 1 year old in that picture there with my grandma. And one of the things that I thought about, in terms of what I experienced being Filipino and growing up Asian, was that elders were never wrong, and you should respect elders at every single moment of the day and night. So some of these messages that I heard was, don't ever push back, don't talk back, right? And in some ways, I interpreted that as silence your own voice in order to be a part of the family or in order to be accepted. I also grew up being dressed in these very cute but girly dresses. So you could see here, I got my Wonder Woman stance in one picture. I just love this picture because I feel that's like me feeling very strong and powerful at, I don't know, the age of 2 or 3. And then you see this more timid picture of me, and this was Easter, and I think I was about 4 years old here with the little strawberry shortcake dress. And then I did ballet growing up. I think that was very short-lived, but it was something that I wasn't really passionate about, but I was kind of forced into doing some of these things. And, the messages that I received was, be a good girl, right? Again, don't talk back, have a voice, but only to a certain point. Grow up and be a good mom. So you could see here, I think I was about 3 years old, and that's me with 2 of my cousins. And I wanted to really point this particular picture out to you all, because I was so upset that day on Christmas that I got the brown-haired baby doll. And I didn't recognize that or realize that until recently as I was going through these pictures, and I had a flashback of that time, and I was so upset that, why did I get the doll that has brown hair and they got the blonde ones? And even back then, right, at even such an early age, I was being told that having brown hair or having blonde hair and blue eyes is the ideal. And I didn't hear that from anyone. No one in my family said, oh, being blonde or being American or being white is better. But somehow I was able to interpret that message. So that picture really stood out to me. The other thing that stood out to me is the assumption or the conditioning that I would be a mom to a human child, right? That was just not questioned at all. I don't have human children. I am, child-free and very happy about that. But the messages that I received growing up and way into my adulthood was the opposite of that. It was that I was broken. There was something wrong with me. Why am I not, striving for this? So I'll go on to the next slide, please. So I know Rach and I have talked a lot about this idea of our gremlins. And, you often hear about this as our inner critic or our saboteur. I'm going to use gremlin for the sake of this talk. And gremlins are oftentimes the voices in our head that tell us that Are you sure? Are you good enough for that? Are you sure you're ready for that promotion? Don't ever talk back or don't argue with anybody, your elders, your family, your boss. Just get in line, right? Who's going to take care of you, right? If you're not married and tied to somebody. And this idea of the high achieving student, that was one thing that I am still, I think, trying to work through and do my own inner work around, in terms of always thinking I need to be getting those A grades or being a perfectionist at many things, whether it's in my business or in different parts of my career. And honestly, that has hurt me in many ways. I know Rachel and I are going to talk about that in just a few moments. So yes, gremlins, imposter syndrome. Absolutely, Tam. I'm looking at the chat here. So yeah, these gremlins are resonating. Yeah, Alyssa, for sure. And we all have them, right? And oftentimes they're here to keep us safe. And it's the wiring in our brain that is trying to keep us safe, keep us where we're at, because it's what we know. And so we often will tend to go to the negative parts of, oh no, maybe I can't go up for that job. Maybe I'm not ready. Let me actually just stay where I'm at because it's comfortable. Let me not leave that job because I don't know if I'm ready for that risk, right? So in many ways, it's our brains trying to, again, keep us safe, but it doesn't always serve us if it's keeping us small. So I wanted to, share a little bit around that piece, because I know that we're going to be talking a bit more of when we have those gremlins come up for us, right? When we have those inner critics telling us that we're not capable or we're not able to do something, or that, for whatever reason, the self-doubt perks up. I'm going to talk a little bit more of what we can do to actually, mitigate that, and how we could work with our gremlins instead of letting them overtake us. So I'm going to pause right there and see any thoughts that you may have, or if, Rach, if you have any questions in terms of what I just shared.
I got a lot of questions. You know that. I got a lot of questions.
I do know that.
I appreciate everybody sharing in the chat. The gremlins are something that we all battle day in, day out, sometimes big gremlins, sometimes small gremlins. What I want to ask you, Annalyn, is how do, because I mean, gremlins, they never entirely go away. We just learn how to manage them better is my personal philosophy. But how did they shape your viewpoint as an adult, like in showing up around your career or relationships or making decisions? Like what's the impact of these? How did they shape you?
Mm-hmm. I think in terms of my career, I'll start there, is that there were times that I would doubt myself of whether I truly belonged at whatever job I was at. And I would totally, second guess myself, like, am I ready for this job, right? Where Rachel and I last worked, I remember my first year was just so difficult because almost every moment of the working day, I thought to myself, maybe they made a mistake. Maybe I'm not ready for this. Maybe I just like sold them on my interview for whatever reason, and they're gonna come on to me, like they're gonna know that the jig is up. and and so I had gremlins telling me that, right? Like I would have those day in and day out where they would say like, yeah, you're not cut out for this. Maybe you should just leave. Maybe go back to higher ed where, you started your career. You were successful there. I don't know if you'll be successful here. Or, if I had, if I was up for a promotion, as an example, and I wanted to advocate for myself, let me backtrack. Even if I wasn't up for the promotion, but I wanted to have that conversation to see if it was a possibility. I remember thinking to myself, well, am I really that valuable, right? Do I have the right to ask for a promotion? Have I proved myself enough? And how that impacted me and how that affected me was that I totally felt like that wasn't serving me well at all. Because in fact, it made me doubt myself. It made me question whether or not I did belong there. And when I sit back and think about, if I'm thinking about it from my higher place self, like my best self, those aren't the messages that the gremlins are telling me. They're almost like two separate camps, right? When we think about that, I call it, like my essence or my highest self or my inner wisdom. When I can get to that place, and I'm going to show you all a framework in just a little bit. When I can get to that place, that's when I feel like I'm in my power, when I'm in my center of, no, you do belong here. You were hired for a reason. Yeah, you absolutely have talents and gifts to share that are different from anyone else on your team. So when I can get to that place, I'm great. But it's when the gremlins start taking over, and this happened a lot more before I started doing some healing, some inner work, when I would talk to my therapist or my coach, that's when I was sort of stuck in the gremlin state.
Thank you. I think what I want to add to that is that our gremlins are illogical. They're not usually based in logic. So
Mm-hmm.
just listening to you share, that critical self, that imposter syndrome of like, maybe they didn't, maybe the hiring team made a mistake. We start to doubt the capabilities of other people in relation to ourselves. Like, well, how, and it's completely illogical. And I just want to remind people out there, when this pops up, whether it's your negative self on one shoulder and your best self on the other, they're both trying to do the same thing, keep you safe, but from very different ways. And one is going to remind you of all the challenges and all the reasons why not. And the other one's going to challenge you in the aspirational space. And it's like managing that. So my next question, Annalyn, is what do you do when your gremlin gets really, really loud, like nowadays, if it pops up? What do you do in the moment
Yeah.
to help you manage that?
Yeah. Well, something that I have really learned to do over time is to step away for a little bit. And what do I mean by that? I mean, getting quiet enough to get curious about, okay, what's coming up for me right now? Right. So I'm getting this message that continues to play over and over again in my brain. Where does that actually stem from? Right. So I want to take you through a practice right now. And Hillary, I'm going to ask you if you could pull up the next slide, because I think it may help folks as I move you through a story of what happened for me when I was considering leaving my last job. Right. So I used to work at EA. Oh, can we actually go back? Yeah, thanks. So one of the things that I had lots of doubts about was leaving EA to start my own business, right? And I was riddled with fear, like every every gremlin fear that you think one would have about leaving their safe, steady corporate job to then go on their own and break out on their own and pursue entrepreneurship in a family that has never done this before was pretty effing scary, right? So one of the things that I started to unpack, again, with my therapist, with my coach, with some of my besties, was this. So if we can go to the next slide here. And what I call this is the work that we have to do within ourselves when we think about when our gremlins start taking over. So the example I just shared here, if we can click to the next slide, this is what often came up for me. Like, why are you leaving a good paying job? Just be happy where you are, right? And when I dug in deep into that, and I remember again working with my therapist on this as well, she said, well, Annalyn, whose voice is that really? Is that yours? Is that really what you are thinking? And is that what you believe? And I said, a little bit, but actually, we can click to the next one. The origin of this particular gremlin's voice was from my dad. And it was the message that he sent to me, again, and understanding where he was coming from as an immigrant from the Philippines, coming to the US and having to really start from scratch, when he came here, right? His first job, even though he had a civil engineering degree in the Philippines, but his first job in the US was doing stock, putting up boxes and doing all this stuff at Toys R Us, which no longer exists, but that's what he was doing, right? And so for him, when he got his job at Caltrans and had a good paying job and had a steady pension, it's like, why would you ever step away from something like that? And that was the gremlin's voice that I heard in my head. And again, the originator was from my dad, but it doesn't always have to be. Sometimes it comes from the media, sometimes it comes from people that you grew up with. And then I started to get more curious. We can go to the next slide here. So why it was showing up? For me, it was showing up because I knew, and the messages again that my dad was sending me throughout when I was growing up was, hey, take care of yourself financially, right? And make sure that you have your basic needs taken care of. So when I stopped to think about, okay, it's not my dad being a pain, it's actually, there was some reasoning as to why he was saying that or why I started internalizing those messages. But again, when I talk about getting quiet enough, so whether it's journaling, whether it's meditation, maybe it's taking a walk in nature, whatever the case may be for you, I got quiet enough to then hear my inner wisdom. So if we can click the next one here. Thank you. What started to happen was that I was seeing more of my best self perspective come up. I was hearing this instead of, I'm going to listen to my intuition. I have this deep knowing and this dream that honestly is not going away, right? This is going to continue to be here for me. And you know what? I do belong here. I can be an entrepreneur. I'm going to figure it out. But unless I really did this work within myself and started to get curious around, why is this gremlin popping up? Let me make sure that I know within myself that my thoughts are actually not what is true. And when I first heard that, I was like, what does that mean? My thoughts aren't necessarily the truth teller, because again, our brains are, it often has a negative bias towards ourselves, right? We are our own worst critics. And, it takes a lot of work that we have to do within ourselves to counteract those, right? And to flip the script on these things. So
Thank you.
I'm
Go
curious
ahead.
if that resonates with folks or like what comes up for you, right? As we talk about getting curious around the gremlins, hearing or thinking about like, where may they be coming from actually? And okay, how can I start accessing my best self, right? The parts of myself that I know is capable and is talented and is powerful. And
I think there's a lot of value in digging, peeling the proverbial onion of your gremlin and getting to the core of the origin, like the origin story of the
yeah,
gremlin. Like, where is this coming from? You and I
right.
have talked about this many times over many years together, and just the
Yeah,
power that they have, those messages, we from our family, I think 50% of the gremlins that I've arm wrestled with over the years, the origin is probably my parents, my dad. Again,
Yep.
we immigrated to Canada. There's all those messages that pop up for kids that have lived in multiple cultures. And I just think getting to the origin helps remove some of the fear and power that those messages have, because you can pull apart saying, I can, and I say this, I can literally hear my dad's voice sometimes when my gremlin
Hmm.
pops up, like, and they're very thick Scottish accent, you know,
Yeah.
telling me to just don't make trouble, Rachel, and I'm
Right.
like, but dad, that's my job. I'm here to tear down the systems and barriers and rebuild on the rubble. Like I have to. And I think that there's just there's freedom. That's where I'm getting to. There's a freedom in that, in this model that you have around identifying this is the message, this is the origin, when does it show up, which then gets you prepared for the next time it shows up so it doesn't take you out quite
That's
as
right.
hard. And then I love that part about the inner wisdom and the honoring, what you know to be true about self and that best self.
Right.
I love
Right.
that. I
Yeah.
love that. We've got some comments in the chat here. Let me just scroll up here. I find my mom was a huge part of the origins of my gremlins message. I think a lot of that is
Mm,
wanting to make her proud. Oh, Tam, I think there's many of us out there that have
yeah.
have similar as well. And Roxy, this is good. There's always a seed that has been watered over the years, and the weed must be pulled so the life is
Mm.
not choked out of the flower. That's beautiful. I love that.
Ooh, Roxy, you
That
just gave me
is,
chills
yeah,
with
you
that
just gave me chills
comment.
with that too. And again, it's a constant. I truly believe that managing your gremlin, your inner self critic, whatever you want to call it, it's like a muscle. You need to use it. And if you stop using it, then it just starts to get louder and louder. And that's where it can lead to all sorts of other challenges. But yes, we've got to weed our gardens to
Yeah.
make sure that we don't get choked out. I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. So on that, I want go ahead, Annalyn, you were going to say something.
Oh, yeah. I was just about to say, one of the practices that I've been doing lately is actually writing in my journal a letter to myself from my best self. So, in those
Oh,
moments when my gremlins start popping up, when my self doubt is kicked up into high gear, what I've been doing is writing a letter to myself from my inner wisdom place, right?
yes.
And being able to read over that in those moments where I'm not feeling good, or when I'm feeling like, ugh, like, do I belong here? Can I do this? When I reread that and knowing that it's actually my voice, where I'm encouraging myself to keep going, that I'm powerful, right? That I know I'm completely capable and talented, or whatever the case may be. I'm lovable, right? All of the things that I know when I'm in a good place, I could access in those times when I'm not in such a great place, right?
Love
So,
that. The
yeah,
power of journaling and writing. That
yeah,
never underestimate it. I'm going to switch things up a little in the questions because we're going on. This is a good tangent. So one
yeah.
of the questions I had for later, but I'm going to bring it up now. You and I last week when we were chatting, you had mentioned as part of this growth of letting go of the old. And I feel like the gremlin is part of that. Like we have to let go of our gremlins, diminish them so that they don't have the power over us.
Mhm.
But talk me through a little bit what that means to you and why is it so hard to let go of the old?
Ooh, why is it so hard to let go of the old? Well, I think part of it is we have been, uh, you know, conditioned in many ways to act and be a certain way because we may have gotten rewarded for it. And I'm not necessarily saying like monetarily, but here's a tangible example. So I got rewarded at certain workplaces when I would grind and work really, really hard to the point of burning myself out. And I got rewarded in the sense that I got the kudos on the back, I got the recognition from people, you know, my friend circle would say like, oh, that's such an amazing job you have, like, right? So I was getting rewarded for these behaviors that I was doing within myself, to myself, that was actually hurting my wellness and my health. And I had to really take a hard look at, is this still serving me? Is this the type of life I want to lead, frankly, right? One that is always constantly grinding or trying to prove myself. But again, it's like we get rewarded or reinforce that message because we live in cultures that, kind of uphold this standard of, that's what you do. You just work hard. You know, you could sleep when you're dead. Like that's when you could do that type of stuff, right? And then it gets reinforced by some people who might be in your circles as well. And for me, having suffered through burnout in 2019, where I had to take a medical leave and take a step back from work, along with other, social plans, and trying to figure out how I could get better in terms of my mental health and my physical health and emotional. I mean, it was a really, really challenging time because I had a lot of shame around that. I had a lot of shame around having to take a step back and take medical leave. And I wouldn't have taken it unless my therapist told me, you need to do this, where I had to have a medical intervention, basically, a professional tell me that I needed some time off because I was going to continue to just not be well. And I think it's really hard when you come up against that because, again, we're sort of swimming in this culture that promotes having to work so much that we lose ourselves in the process. And I know you and I have talked about that as
Yes, we
well,
have.
Rach.
We have. Um, I made a note of one of the things you said last week when we were getting ready for this talk around the letting go of the old.
Yeah.
And you had said something around you have to have the courage and bravery to make your own choices. And there's
Yeah.
so much power in that. I mean, it's such a simple statement, but there's so much power in it because if you're dealing with your own gremlins, you're dealing with the cultural nuances of growing up and those other pressures and messaging, it can feel almost insurmountable at times to be brave, to stop and raise your hand and say, I need to tap out. Like
Yeah.
to your point, when you took your leave back in 2019, it was I know how hard it was because I worked in the same environment
Yeah.
where you were on one hand encouraged to be your authentic self, which we want people to be, bring your full authentic self to work. But that grind culture, that lack of vulnerability to be able to say, I'm underwater,
Yeah.
and get support. There's the corporate culture, there's your own culture, there's your gremlins, there's where you're at in terms of your imposter syndrome, your support mechanisms, your hype, like all of those come into play. And I just
Hmm.
really wanted to share with the group that, what you had shared with me around the courage and bravery to make our own choices outside of all of this other messaging and pressure and gremlins and voices,
Hmm.
can sometimes feel just like the biggest thing that you've ever done. But on the other side of those choices is where you move towards that better self and that best self. So
Hmm.
I really feel like that's such an important message, for folks to hear from you today
Yeah.
around that.
And it's hard work, right? It is hard work to really kind of almost put yourself in your own protective bubble of those external pressures and messages that we receive. Like it is hard work to do that. And I think in many ways that's why I had to take a leave, right? To just be within and be by myself to figure out what is it that I want moving forward? And then what can I do to protect my energy and my health at this point? Because it's not good, right?
Mhm.
And in full transparency, you all, like, I did not tell my parents or my family. I think my sister may have known at a certain point, but I did not tell my parents, and they still don't know to this day, that I took a medical leave because I was burned out. Because I was unsure how they would react. And honestly, I think they would have had some of the I already had gremlin voices coming
Mhm.
through within, like, oh, what does this mean that you're not capable enough? Oh, are you going to lose your job because you decided to take a step back? Oh, like, blah 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 blah. And I knew if I literally heard that from either of them, that would just send me over the edge. Like, I just
Mhm.
knew I had to protect myself from what could possibly be. And I don't know if they would completely understand what that meant. Mental health was not something we talked about in my family. I know that that's often the case, generally speaking, for a lot of us coming from AAPI cultures, where it's just not talked about. Feelings and emotions in my family were not really discussed at all. So when it was, even to this day, my parents kind of tend to sweep it under the rug or to just move on to the next point of conversation, right? And again, I can't knock them too much for that, because that was the generation that they grew up in, and that was the culture that they grew up in. And I know what I'm trying to do is actively heal some ancestral trauma that has been passed down in my family for generations. While I may not know everything that has happened, I know that my family has dealt with wars, they have dealt with colonization, they have dealt with discrimination and racism coming to a country that often sees them as other, and they continue to hear this to this day, right? So, part of this is, for me, when I get frustrated with my parents or our internal struggles that we may have time to time, I think about how can I find the compassion and acceptance for also how they grew up and what they had to deal with, because
Yeah.
I didn't have to deal with that. I don't know what it's like to move to another country where I had to leave home because of martial law that was happening at the time in the Marcos regime. I have no idea what that was like, but that's why they fled. And that's why they fled, to have a better life for me and my sister. And, and again, we talk about in many API families, we talk about the sacrifice, right? The sacrifice that, our elders make in order for us to come here. And I, at least for me, I know that I have sometimes dealt with some feelings of guilt if I moved away from what the family expected and wanted. And to your point, what I said last week was, it does take bravery and courage to move away from that, or to at least explore other ways of being and doing. And and that's why I think it's also important to find people in your close inner circle, like you are to me, Rach. Like, you are a part of my hype crew, right? I know that Wendy talked about that in her talk about, finding your circle of trust, right? Finding your board of directors. But for me, when I define hype crew, it's exactly what you think of when you think of that term. It's like, who are the people that are going to hype you up when you are feeling down, or when you're just feeling like, I don't know if I'm, able to do this thing. It's folks like you that I think about when, you've helped me just be like, Annalyn, you are talented. You are so powerful. You are amazing. Right. And I'm like, oh, thank you. Especially when you're not in that place, right, of feeling great about yourself, or if you're doubting yourself, you need those folks in your life who can hold a mirror up and say, you are absolutely powerful and amazing, and you could do this. And it's easier to hear from someone else, at least for me, than to sometimes believe it within myself.
Oh yeah. Sometimes that's the only way you hear it. Um,
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think there's nothing more powerful than having your own cheerleaders, folks that know you, that remind you that you belong here and your voice is valid. That's it.
Yes.
Like you belong here and your voice is valid. Just
Yeah.
keep repeating that. And I mean, you think about how many times we've shot text messages back and forth to each other over the years of like, just before you go into a present day, you got this, you go, girl.
Yeah.
Like, that's honestly, sometimes that's just enough to just like, okay, I remember there's
Right.
somebody out here who's borne witness to what I can do and is giving me the thumbs up so that I can go and do it again because my
Right.
gremlin's screaming at me right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And
love
there,
that.
and there is no shame in needing that extra support. Like we are not
No,
meant to go at this life alone. Like it is a basic human need that we need community, we need belonging, right? We need that sense of community support in order for us to continue moving forward.
yeah,
And we need that at the job too,
of
right?
course.
We need that within the workplace. So it's like, how do you find people to be a part of your hype crew at work?
Mhm. Building those connections with folks, building your team of advocates so that I can
Mhm.
advocate for you when you're not in the room, or I can elevate your
Right.
voice if I feel you're not getting a moment at the table.
Yes.
To steal from one of our DEI folks here, our dear friend Crystal Daniels, who I think might be on the line, maybe not. I think she was. Become a table banger. So it's not only that we deserve a place at the table, we got to table bang when we've got that space at the
Mm,
table.
I love
Um,
that.
on that note, what I want to do is there's a couple questions around specifically. So when you think about Asia Pacific American Heritage Month, AAPI month, like what
Mhm.
tell me why this month is so important to our AAPI community, as well as those of us who are allies.
Yeah. I think part of it for me is elevating and amplifying our voices that are often invisible, and while we may have some of the numbers, depending on what companies you're looking at, it is rare when you have um, AAPI folks up at the top, right? In leadership positions, or it sort of kind of levels out at a certain point. And I think so one, I think it's our voices need to be heard a lot more, and we need to be thinking about how we continue to develop our folks at these like maybe earlier stages of their career, as an example,
Mhm.
right? What's the coaching that they need? What's the advocacy they need in their job in order to be successful? Because it's not an even playing field. It just isn't. Let's call it what it is, right?
Mhm.
There's bias, there's discrimination, there's racism. And I think particularly over the past few years, there's been so much anti-Asian Pacific Islander um, hatred, racism, violence. I mean, it's just been overwhelming for many of us, right? And it brings up, at least for me, and I know for others, like a lot of fear of just going around the world, right? Like just being in our day to day. So, for me, this month shouldn't end in May. Like we should be having these
All year.
conversations all freaking year. And, you know, as with all of the other, communities, right? Like we shouldn't
Yes.
just have February as Black History Month, right? Or just, all these other months that are dedicated. I'm glad that they are there because it's a great point to start with and continue to uplift and elevate folks within our different communities, particularly our BIPOC and women communities. However, like once it starts June 1st rolls around, like we need to continue this
Yes.
conversation. And to
So
me, like I personally get so inspired by seeing other people who are, out here speaking about their experiences. Because for me, a lot of my experiences of how I grew up, or even, some of the challenges I had in the workplace later on, I was ashamed about that for many years and kept that within myself. So for me, I'm like trying to, I'm like, screw it. I'm not going to be ashamed of this anymore. Like, I'm going to speak power to these experiences because it made me who I am. And if it somehow inspires, or at least, someone in the audience can feel like, oh, I'm not alone, right? Annalyn spoke to, you know, XYZ, and I'm not alone, and I'm not, making this stuff up in my head. Like, no, these experiences are real. Then I'm doing my life's work around this. I'm turning around these stories that I used to have so much shame around to then bring it to light, right? Bring it to light and to hopefully, show others that there is a way out and through. And then the work continues too within ourselves and then within our communities as well.
So on that note, what advice would you have for young Asian Americans who are just starting out their career based on everything you've learned? And as I have said, as we both move into those wisdom years as women in
Yeah.
this space, I feel like the gift is that we can share the challenges that we've overcome. We can
Mm-hmm.
hopefully remove some of those barriers so that others don't have to go through them, because I don't
Yeah.
believe in this, well, you have to work as hard as I did to get to where I am. That doesn't jive with me at all.
It's
It's
bullshit,
like,
actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's true. How do
Yeah.
we make sure, what can we do to help nurture and support young Asian Americans as they continue to navigate their career in these corporate worlds? And in
Yeah.
tech and games, since you and I have both been in this industry for years and
Right.
years.
Right. The first thing that I would say is, again, to continue to tell yourselves that you belong here and that your voice and your experience and you as a human being and as an Asian American Pacific Islander absolutely belong here. We need you here in this space. Like, we absolutely need you all here. And I know for me, particularly early in my career, as I was trying to figure out all of these ways to find my voice, to have those courageous and difficult conversations, whether it was my first boss at a grad school who I just had a lot of conflict with. And I thank her now actually in my mind, because I think you helped me find my voice in advocating for myself, that I wasn't getting the development or the recognition or the, frankly, the work environment that I needed to thrive. In order for me to get that, I had to voice what I was feeling was wrong in the situation. And that went against everything I learned within my family, to not rock the boat, to keep quiet, and to keep my head down. So for me, it's, how do you find your voice and your agency and knowing that you absolutely belong here? And sometimes that means having to have those difficult conversations that could easily be swept under the rug. It's not easy because it'll keep festering actually within yourself. But how do you find those moments within yourself, whether it's, hey, I need to talk to my hype crew colleague about this conversation that I'm about to have. How can I prepare myself so that I'm entering this conversation full of my own power and agency, right? So I think that's one, is learning how to advocate for yourself and to know what it is that you bring to the quote unquote table. And I say that by not having to prove yourself constantly, but it's knowing without the external validation from others that, one, yes, you absolutely belong. And what are my superpowers, right? Like, what do I bring to any team, or what superpower do I bring within my work that I could write down, or I could say, hey, Rach, I'm really trying to work on my public speaking skills as an example. Will you help me with that? Or will you give me feedback when I present at a team meeting? What did I do well? How can I improve? So that you're creating that safety, that psychological safety for yourself in those moments in order for you to prepare a bit better, in those cases. And what else do I want to say about that? That, we're constantly going to be working with other human beings, and everyone has their own story and experiences. And so what I could say is part of this too is, how can I not take things so personally and think that there's a story that's being played out here without me having a conversation with the person, right? So it's like my responsibility, if I'm starting to have a narrative around what may be going on, to actually have a conversation about it. And that is scary.
Oh, so scary.
It's scary, and it's needed.
It's so neat. Yeah. And it takes practice, and it's not something that we rush into. So again, to pile on what you've already said, like use your hype crew, use the folks that you trust, to prepare, because learning how to have, and I say difficult, any type of conversation where you maybe have a difference of opinion, or you're asking or advocating for self, the number one thing would be just to prepare. To your point, Annalyn, is give yourself that prep. We are at time. And so two things. Number one, we've shared Annalyn's contact information on the screen here. So if you're interested in learning more about Grounded in Wisdom, or the wonderful and fabulous Annalyn Cruz, grab her contact information. We will share it out in the newsletter that comes out in another few days.
As a thank you to all of you, I have a few openings for a gifted 90-minute session with me. So go ahead,
grab your
click
phones,
on the QR code. Yep. So I offer these up at some of the speaking engagements that I do. And this is just as a thank you. And if you want to, be able to dive in a little bit deeper, maybe you've never worked with a coach before, or you're just curious, like, what's this revolutionize your life session all about? If you're interested, I have a few spots available on my Calendly for this. So this will take you to a Google form that will then give you the link to book some time with me. And I would love it if I had some Amazon Games or Amazon Entertainment folks who showed up on my calendar. So thank you all.
Well, thank you for sharing that lovely bonus with our folks, Annalyn. We really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for joining. Thanks, Rachel, for staying on camera. Hillary and I need to run off and do new hire orientation right now. So all right. On that note, I want to say again, thanks so much, friend. I love you, and I'm so appreciative of you, and I can't wait to see you sometime very soon.
Good. Yeah. Thanks everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Hillary. Bye all.
Bye.